Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 8, printed in Part B of House Report number 115-3, offered by Mrs. Hartzler of Missouri.
Pursuant to House Resolution 40, the gentlelady from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler, and a member opposed will each control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to offer an amendment to bring certainty to farmers, agricultural cooperatives, and grain elevators across Missouri and the country that are having problems complying with burdensome reporting requirements at the CFTC. Dodd-Frank never intended to regulate end users like independent grain elevators who work on behalf of Missouri farmers to help manage their price risk. My amendment works to correct this oversight and provide a stable environment for all players in the industry. My amendment is simple. It would require the Commission to address 3 outstanding concerns to the Ownership and Control Reports Rule, better known as the OCR Rule, before the Commission can begin enforcement, which, by the way, the CFTC is not enforcing presently. This industry currently is operating under a no-action relief letter, meaning the OCR Rule is not being enforced due to the inability of the industry to meet the stringent requirements of the CFTC regulations. That could change, and the problem needs to be addressed. But specifically, my amendment does 3 things. First, it increases the threshold from 50 to 300 contracts per day per commodity for those market participants that need to comply with this rule. This will exempt low-volume entities like grain elevators and small agriculture cooperatives from the reporting requirements designed for large trading firms and major players in these markets. Even with the new thresholds established by my amendment, the CFTC will still gather ownership and control information on the major players and mid-sized traders. Second, my amendment removes a small but very burdensome portion of the long list of reporting requirements under the final OCR rule. My amendment removes the natural person controller requirements, which require farmer cooperatives and grain elevators to report specifically personally identifiable information on individual employees. The CFTC has never required such granular information for many of my constituent businesses, and such requirements are making futures commission merchants less willing to work with small and medium-sized entities in the countryside. Even with the small changes made by my amendment, the CFTC will still be properly equipped to track ownership and account control data across the market. And finally, this amendment will require the CFTC to ensure that current regulations do not conflict with current foreign privacy laws. Having a large, open, liquid market is important to managing risk, and operating on an international basis is a valuable aspect of a commodity market. The CFTC should be responsible for dealing with other governments on privacy concerns. It's inappropriate to push that amendment onto the firms and customers that it regulates. This amendment is supported by a wide range of industry and farmers groups, and I encourage my colleagues to support my amendment to provide relief from the regulatory burdens of this rule on small cooperatives, grain elevators, and farmers who are merely hedging their legitimate market risk and serving their customers' interests. I yield back, reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves the balance of her time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
I rise and claim the time in opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment contains several troubling drafting, some people call them errors or I guess questions. It prevents the CFTC from enforcing noncompliance with final rule that includes more forms than were targeted. So, you know, when we did our part of the Dodd-Frank bill, one of the things that I thought was really not controversial was that we were going to try to find out once and for all who owned all of these swaps and who was on what side of positions, and this is what caused the problem in the first place with the financial meltdown. You know, when Lehman Brothers went down, we allowed them to go broke. It created this big panic. You know, we had AIG, and didn't know if they could cover their swaps or not, and it was going to unravel the whole situation because these firms that were trading didn't know who held what or what was going on. And that was the underlying problem. So what we were trying to do is get some understanding of where everybody was in this market. When we were doing the bill, we made it very clear, and I put in the legislation that end users were not covered. That shouldn't have been an issue. So the problem with this amendment, it looks like it's going to include more than just that. So I guess, again, this is a final example in this bill of a process moving too quickly and a lack of regular order. And then finally, it contains a section on foreign privacy laws that could result in the agency seeing a reduced scope of market in their surveillance activities. It may not be the intention. But again, without a chance to consider this provision in regular order, we're not sure, and the concerns that some people have remain unaddressed. So, this could have been resolved during the process. It hasn't been, and at the present form, I oppose the amendment, and I yield back.
Does the gentleman reserve or yield back? Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Missouri.
Yield myself whatever time is left.
Gentlelady has 2 minutes remaining.
I would remind our colleagues that this rule is right now under a no action relief letter because it isn't working. And that's what this amendment does, is to fix this problem. And so I believe this amendment is very important. It makes a few common sense changes to the OCR rule that will provide regulatory relief to farmers, agricultural cooperatives, and grain elevators, while allowing the CFTC to adequately regulate the futures industry. So I would encourage my colleagues to support this amendment, and I yield back the